My name's Rachel, and boy, do I have a story to tell you. It all started after I graduated college and landed a job as a flight attendant. Fresh-faced and eager, I was ready to take on the world, one flight at a time. It was on one of those routine flights that I met him, Jack. Tall, handsome, with a smile that could light up the cockpit. Yeah, you guessed it, he was the pilot. Our eyes met as I was doing the pre-flight checks, and I swear, it was like something out of a cheesy romance movie. From that moment on, Jack and I were inseparable. We'd grab coffee during layovers, swap stories about passengers, and before I knew it, we were dating. It was a whirlwind romance, the kind you read about in books or see in movies. We were young, in love, and the sky was literally the limit. 6 months after we met, Jack proposed. It wasn't anything fancy, just us, on the beach, during a stopover in Hawaii. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jack got down on one knee, sand sticking to his uniform pants, and pulled out a ring. We got married in a small ceremony a few months later. Life was perfect, or so I thought. It was about a year into our marriage. I was working a long-haul flight from New York to Tokyo. Everything was going smoothly until we hit some turbulence over the Pacific. I was in the middle of the cabin, making sure everyone was secure. That's when it happened. The plane suddenly dropped, like the bottom had fallen out of the sky. I was thrown off my feet, my body slamming into the overhead compartments before I hit the floor. Pain, blinding, white-hot pain shot through my back. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. Panic set in as I realized something was seriously wrong. The rest of the flight was a blur. Emergency landing in Anchorage, being rushed to the hospital, doctors poking and prodding. The diagnosis came like a punch to the gut, severe spinal injury. Just like that, my life in the sky was over. The airline was good about it, I'll give them that. They paid for my medical bills, offered me a hefty compensation. Jack was my rock through it all. He'd sit by my hospital bed, hold my hand as I went through physical therapy. "We'll get through this, Ratch," he'd say. "Together." And we did. Slowly but surely, I learned to walk again. But flying? That was off the table. The doctors were clear, any more stress on my spine could lead to permanent damage. So, I had to reinvent myself. The airline offered me a position in their ground staff, and I took it. It wasn't the same as being up in the air, but it was something. With the compensation money, Jack and I decided to buy a house. A beautiful, spacious place in a nice neighborhood. It was more than we needed, really, but Jack insisted. "You deserve this, Rachel," he said. "After everything you've been through." As Jack and I settled into our new house, I thought we were finally getting our happily ever after. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and mine came in the form of my sister-in-law, Sarah. From the moment I met her, I could tell Sarah didn't like me. She was Jack's younger sister, married with a 4-year-old son, but there was always this edge to her. Like she was constantly sizing me up, looking for flaws. I remember the first time she visited our new house. Her eyes darted around, taking in every detail. "Well, isn't this nice?" she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You certainly landed on your feet after that accident, didn't you, Rachel? Some people have all the luck, I guess. Even when they fall, they land in a pile of money." I bit my tongue, not wanting to start a fight. Jack had always been close to his sister, despite her difficult personality. I didn't want to be the one to come between them. Over the next few months, Sarah's visits became more frequent, and her comments more biting. Every time she came over, it was like walking on eggshells. I tried to be the bigger person, to ignore her jabs and passive-aggressive remarks. But it was wearing me down. One day, after a particularly nasty comment about how I was milking my injury, I confronted Jack about it. "I can't take it anymore," I said, tears of frustration in my eyes. "Your sister hates me, and I don't know why." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's just Sarah. She's always been jealous of others. It's not you, it's her. I'll talk to her, okay? She needs to back off. But talking to Sarah didn't seem to help. If anything, it made her more resentful. She'd make a show of being polite when Jack was around, but the moment he was out of earshot, the claws would come out. It all came to a head about a year after we moved in. Sarah showed up unannounced one afternoon, all smiles and sweetness. I was immediately on guard. "Rachel, darling," she cooed, and I had to resist the urge to check for flying pigs. "I have a huge favor to ask." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "Well, you see, Tommy's 5th birthday is coming up," she said, referring to her son. "And I was wondering, could we possibly have his party here?" I must have looked shocked, because she quickly added, "It's just, your house is so beautiful, and I have some important business contacts I want to impress. It would mean so much to me." I hesitated. On one hand, this was Sarah, the woman who'd made my life miserable for the past year. On the other, maybe this was an olive branch? A chance to finally build a better relationship? Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. In the weeks leading up to Tommy's birthday, I threw myself into party planning with gusto. I spent hours scouring the internet for party ideas, saving Pinterest boards, and watching YouTube tutorials. I wanted everything to be perfect, from the decorations to the food, right down to the party favors. The day before the party, I was a whirlwind of activity. I'd ordered beautiful decorations, balloons in Tommy's favorite colors, a custom banner, and even hired a face painter. The snacks were all prepared, a mix of kid-friendly treats and some fancier hors d'oeuvres for the adults. I'd even baked the cake myself, a 3-tiered masterpiece covered in fondant and decorated with little rocket ships. Tommy was going through a space phase. As I was putting the finishing touches on the living room decorations, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Everything ready for tomorrow? Remember, first impressions are everything." I rolled my eyes, but texted back a cheerful, "All set. It's going to be great." When morning finally came, I was up at the crack of dawn, double and triple checking everything. Jack had an early flight, so he kissed me goodbye and wished me luck before heading out. "You've got this," he said, giving me a reassuring smile. "And remember, it's just a kid's birthday party. Don't stress too much." I nodded, but inside, I knew it was more than just a party. It was my chance to finally prove myself to Sarah, to show her that I was a valuable part of this family. As the clock ticked closer to party time, I got dressed in my nicest outfit, a pretty floral dress that I hoped struck the right balance between casual and put together. I did my hair and makeup, wanting to look my best for Sarah's important business contacts. Just as I was giving the living room one final once-over, the doorbell rang. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. Showtime. I opened the door with a bright smile, ready to welcome Sarah and Tommy. "Happy birthday, big guy," I said, kneeling down to Tommy's level. Sarah breezed past me, her eyes scanning the decorated living room. "Well, it looks adequate," she said, her tone making it clear that adequate was a stretch. I bit back a retort and instead held out the beautifully wrapped gift for Tommy. "Here you go, sweetie. I hope you like it." Sarah snatched the gift from my hands before Tommy could reach for it. "We'll open presents later," she said curtly. Then, her eyes locked onto mine, a strange glint in them. "Rachel, dear, I need you to go to the city park and take a nice long walk. Say, 2 or 3 hours?" I blinked, sure I had misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Sarah's smile tightened. "You heard me. I'll meet the guests myself. You're superfluous here." The words hit me like a slap. "Sarah, this is my home. I'm not going anywhere. I've spent weeks preparing for this party. I thought we could finally build a good relationship." Sarah's laughter cut through the air, sharp and mocking. "Oh, Rachel, you're so naive. I have no interest in being friends with you. None whatsoever." Before I could process what was happening, Sarah had grabbed my arm and was pushing me towards the door. I tried to resist, but she was surprisingly strong. Sarah, stop. What are you doing? With a final shove, I found myself stumbling out onto the front porch. The door slammed behind me, the sound echoing in the quiet neighborhood. I stood there, stunned, my mind struggling to catch up with what had just happened. I patted my pockets, realizing with growing horror that I had nothing but my phone. As if reading my thoughts, the door opened again. Sarah appeared, holding my purse and car keys. Here, she said, tossing them at my feet. Now get out of here. I don't want you embarrassing me in front of my friends. The door slammed shut again, leaving me alone in the driveway, staring at my own front door in disbelief. Numbly, I picked up my purse and keys and got into my car. My hands were shaking as I tried to figure out what to do. I dialed Jack's number, praying he'd pick up, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course, he was on a flight. In desperation, I called my mother-in-law. Surely she'd see reason. Linda, thank God, I said, my voice cracking. Sarah's thrown me out of my own house. She's having Tommy's party without me. You've got to help me. There was a pause, and then Linda's voice came back, cold and dismissive. Rachel, dear, I'm sure you're exaggerating. I'll be there soon to celebrate with my daughter and grandson. This is their day. Why don't you just stay out for a while? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Linda, please. But she had already hung up. Tears of frustration and hurt welled up in my eyes. I wanted to march back into that house and throw everyone out. But then I thought of Tommy, innocent in all this, and Jack, who would be devastated if I caused a scene with his family. With shaking hands, I scrolled through my contacts and called Sarah's husband, Mark. Rachel? Mark's voice was surprised. What's up? I took a deep breath and explained everything that had happened. Mark listened in stunned silence. I had no idea, he said when I finished. Rachel, I'm so sorry. I didn't even know Sarah was planning to have the party at your place. I'm stuck at work, but I'll be there in about 3 hours. Can you hang tight until then? I agreed, not knowing what else to do. Feeling lost and betrayed, I drove to a nearby cafe. As I sat there, nursing a coffee I couldn't taste, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had my attempt at building bridges turned into this nightmare? After what felt like an eternity, Mark's car pulled into the cafe parking lot. We drove up to my house in silence and walked in without knocking. The scene that greeted us was surreal. My living room was full of people I didn't recognize, all dressed to the nines. In the center of it all was Sarah, holding court like a queen at her coronation. Mark's voice cut through the chatter like a knife. What the hell is going on here? The room fell silent. Sarah's head whipped around, her face draining of color when she saw us. She tried to pull Mark aside, her voice low and urgent. Please, not in front of everyone. I can explain everything. But Mark wasn't having it. No, Sarah, I want answers now. Under the weight of Mark's glare and the curious stares of the guests, Sarah finally cracked. Fine, she hissed. I invited Jason and his parents, okay? She gestured to a smug-looking man in an expensive suit. They're very influential, and they promised to help me with my business venture. I couldn't pass up the opportunity. Mark's face reddened. So you used our son's birthday as a networking event? And what about my parents? Sarah's next words made my blood run cold. Your parents? Please. They're not exactly the kind of people who can help us get ahead. What was the point of inviting them? A tense silence fell over the room. Then, to my horror, Jason, Sarah's ex, raised his champagne glass in a mocking toast. No hard feelings, Mark, he said with a smirk. That was the last straw. Mark lunged at Jason, and suddenly my carefully planned party devolved into chaos. People were shouting, glasses were breaking, and in the middle of it all was Tommy, looking confused and scared. The party dissolved quickly after that. Guests hurried out, muttering apologies and avoiding eye contact. But Sarah wasn't done. Instead of apologizing to Mark or me, she cornered Jason and his parents, groveling and making excuses. "I'm so sorry about this," she simpered. "My husband doesn't understand how important networking is. I hope this hasn't ruined our chances of working together." As the last of the guests trickled out, I was left standing in my wrecked living room, surrounded by the ruins of the party I'd worked so hard to plan. Mark was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, while Sarah continued to make excuses. Tommy had retreated to a corner, clutching the gift I'd given him earlier, looking lost and confused. When Jack finally returned from his trip, I broke down and told him everything. He pulled me into a tight hug, and for the first time since the party, I felt safe. "I promise you," he whispered, "I won't let her treat you like this ever again. You have my full support." True to his word, Jack called Sarah that very evening. I could hear his raised voice from the other room, words like disrespectful and inexcusable cutting through the air. When he hung up, he looked drained but resolute. "She won't be bothering us again anytime soon," he assured me. But the drama was far from over. Over the next few weeks, we heard through the family grapevine that Sarah and Mark's marriage was imploding. Apparently, Mark's suspicions about Sarah's relationship with her ex-boyfriend, Jason, had reached a boiling point. One evening, Mark called us, sounding desperate. "I found messages," he said, his voice cracking. "Hundreds of them, between Sarah and Jason. They'd been in constant contact before and after the party." My heart sank for Mark. "I'm so sorry," I said, not knowing what else to offer. "That's not all," Mark continued. "I did a paternity test on Tommy. I had to know." The situation was spiraling out of control. To make matters worse, Jack's parents seemed to have taken Sarah's side in all of this. One afternoon, I received a scathing call from Linda, my mother-in-law. "How dare you turn my children against each other," she screeched into the phone. "You've torn this family apart with your selfish behavior." I was stunned. "Linda, I didn't do anything." "Sarah." "Don't you dare blame Sarah," she interrupted. "She was just trying to better herself and her family. You're nothing but a self-centered homewrecker." Then came the day Mark received the paternity test results. He showed up at our doorstep, looking shell-shocked. "Tommy's mine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's really mine." While this should have been a relief, it only seemed to complicate matters further. When Sarah found out about the test, she exploded. "How dare you question my fidelity," she shrieked at Mark during a confrontation we unfortunately witnessed. "Everything I've done has been for us, for our family." Mark scoffed. "Sneaking around with your ex is for our family?" "You don't understand," she yelled back. "Jason's mother has connections. I was trying to build a network, to create opportunities for us. But you," she pointed an accusing finger at Mark, "you're too much of a loser to see the bigger picture." The argument escalated, with Sarah hurling insults and accusations. And then, in a move that left us all stunned, Sarah stormed out. She returned an hour later with packed bags, Tommy clutching her hand. "I'm done," she announced coldly. "I'm going to build my empire, with or without you. You can keep your precious paternity test. I'll be back for Tommy when I'm successful." With that, she walked out, leaving a devastated Mark and a confused Tommy behind. Jack and I exchanged a look, silently agreeing that our lives had just become infinitely more complicated. We had chosen our side in this family war, and there was no going back now. The following months were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional turmoil. Jack and I found ourselves thrust into the role of impromptu babysitters, often looking after Tommy while Mark dealt with lawyers and court appearances. I couldn't help but feel a gnawing guilt. If I hadn't interrupted that party, would any of this have happened? One evening, as we were putting Tommy to bed after a long day of distracting him with games and stories, I confessed my feelings to Jack. "I can't help thinking this is all my fault," I whispered, fighting back tears. Jack pulled me close, his voice firm but gentle. "Rachel, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Sarah's always been like this, spoiled, selfish, unable to see or respect boundaries. You were just trying to be kind. She's the one who took advantage of that kindness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of legal battles, the divorce was finalized. Mark was awarded full custody of Tommy, with Sarah granted limited visitation rights. It felt like we could all finally breathe again. Then, to our surprise and joy, I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't an easy pregnancy. My old spinal injury from the plane accident made things complicated. I had to wear a supportive corset constantly, and there were days when the pain was almost unbearable. But every time I felt the baby move, every time I saw the grainy image on the ultrasound screen, I knew it was worth it. Jack was over the moon, doting on me hand and foot. We thought we'd finally put the drama behind us. We were wrong. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. The doorbell rang, and Jack went to answer it. I heard his sharp intake of breath before I saw her. Sarah, standing on our doorstep, looking nothing like the polished, ambitious woman who'd stormed out of our lives years ago. "I need to talk to Mark," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please." Jack called Mark, who arrived within minutes, his face a mask of wary confusion. Sarah launched into her story as soon as he walked in. "I've made a horrible mistake," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "The business, it all fell apart. Jason, he used me. When the project failed, he just left. I need help. They're demanding repayment. I thought maybe you could be a guarantor for a loan." The room fell silent. Tommy had stopped playing, watching the adults with wide, confused eyes. Mark took a deep breath. "No, Sarah," he said finally. "I won't be your guarantor, and I won't take you back. You made your choice years ago." Sarah's face crumpled. But what about Tommy? Don't you want him to have his mother back?" Mark's voice was steel. "Tommy has been just fine without you. We've moved on, Sarah. I think you should too." Just when we thought the dust had settled, Sarah made her grand reappearance. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was enjoying a rare moment of peace, sipping herbal tea on the porch, my very pregnant belly making even this simple task a bit of a challenge. The sound of tires screeching broke the tranquility. Sarah burst out of her car, her face a mask of desperation and anger. "Jack," she screamed, storming up our walkway. "I need to talk to you." Jack appeared at the door, his face hardening at the sight of his sister. "Sarah, you need to leave. Now." But Sarah was beyond reason. She pointed an accusing finger at me. "This is all her fault. If she hadn't come into our lives, none of this would have happened." I felt a familiar knot of guilt forming in my stomach, but Jack's firm voice cut through my doubts. "That's enough, Sarah," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Rachel has done nothing but support this family, even when you tried to tear it apart. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. If you come here again, I'll call the police." For a moment, I thought Sarah might lunge at us. Instead, she spun on her heel and marched back to her car. As she peeled away, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The next morning, we woke to find Sarah had set up a tent on our front lawn. She'd fashioned a crude sign, "Family abandonment in progress, shame on you." "This is ridiculous," Jack muttered, reaching for his phone. True to his word, he called the police. The officers were sympathetic but explained that as long as Sarah remained on public property, there wasn't much they could do. They did, however, issue her a warning about harassment. This standoff continued for days. Sarah would shout at us whenever we left the house, beg Jack to help her when he came home from work, and tried to guilt-trip me about stealing her family. Finally, after a week of this nightmare, we got a call from Linda. "I've convinced Sarah to come home," she said, her voice tired. "I'm sorry for everything. I see now that she needs help, not enabling." True to Linda's word, Sarah packed up her tent that evening. As she drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But the peace was short-lived. Jack found me in the nursery later that night, absently folding and refolding onesies. "Ratch," he said gently, "I've been thinking. Maybe we should sell the house." Move somewhere Sarah doesn't know about. Somewhere we can raise our baby in peace. The next few months were a whirlwind of real estate agents, packing boxes, and doctor's appointments. We found a smaller house in a quiet neighborhood across town, right next to a good school and a public library. It was perfect. Epilogue. It's been 5 years since we moved. Lily, our daughter, is a happy, healthy kindergartner, and Tommy, now a teenager, is a frequent visitor and doting cousin. Mark has found happiness with a kind woman who loves Tommy like her own. We hear from Linda occasionally. She tells us Sarah is working 2 jobs to pay off her debts and seems to be getting her life together. Part of me hopes that one day, she'll be ready to be a part of our lives again. But for now, we're content.